I'm back for those that are joining us online. Good afternoon, Prof. Kumete.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, all reps from the Joburg City Council entities.
Oh, perfect. Thanks. Whilst we are waiting for the EM to join us quickly, I'm going to read the bio for our next speaker. And we're going to our last item, the agenda. That's the understanding the dynamics of coalition governments and their joint priorities in ensuring service delivery. And that will be delivered by Professor William Kumete. Professor William Kumete is based at the School of Governance, University of Witwatersrand here in Johannesburg. He was a convener of the course on public finance and economics, including how to put together the national budget for national members of parliament from all political parties in South Africa. He was a convener of the local government leadership and oversight course for the mayors, MMCs, and senior executives here in the city of Johannesburg. He taught the programs for MPs of the British Commonwealth on the financial management of their parliaments and how to conduct themselves ethically as MPs. He was co-founder and co-principal author of South Africa's 2012 Development Report, Development Bank of Southern Africa. He was advisor to the Presidential Review Committee on State-Owned Companies from 2009 to 2013, which made proposals on restructuring of SOEs in South Africa. He wrote the African Development Bank report on restructuring of state-owned enterprises in the natural resource sector, telecommunications, electricity, water, and sanitation utilities of South Korea. He was principal author of the report Reforming SOCs to Deliver on Their Mandates, Ministry of Financial Services and Good Governance, Mauritius, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, and African Peer Review Mechanism. He was principal author, Best Practices in Improving the Efficiency in SOCs in developing countries, Government of Uruguay, TNI, and Montevideo. He was advisor to the UNESCO World Social Science Report 2016, Challenging Inequalities, Pathways to a Just World, in Paris, France. He was principal author of Chapter 6, Well-Governed Cities of the State of South African Cities Report 2016. He wrote the chapter on the management of disasters and emergencies by the cities, the 2021 State of the Cities Report 2021. He was the convener of the South African government's 2010 Development State Conference, Reserve Bank of South Africa, and co-convener of the annual Drakensberg Inclusive Economic Growth Conference for South Africa. He modeled and established a number of state entities, including the Parliamentary Budget Office, was advisor in setting up the National Treasure Infrastructure Project Preparation Fund, and was one of the co-founders of the Institute of Directors of Southern Africa and National Treasurer's Public Sector Audit Committee Forum. He also which was established to strengthen the capacity of public sector audit committees from 2009 to 2013. He was a principal author of the IODS and the Price Waterhouse and Waterhouse and Coopers, that's PwC working paper, which analyzes areas to strengthen in the Public Management Finance Act and the New Companies Act of 2013. He wrote the academic text on corporate governance of municipal entities in the Wets Governance edited book, Governance in the Post-Colony, Wits University Press of 2019. Previously, he was a senior associate and program director, School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. He was course leader, School of Public Policy, Central European University, Budapest. He was senior associate member and Oppenheimer Fellow, St. Antony's College, Oxford University, Senior Research Fellow and Graduate Student Mentor, London School of Economics and Political Science, Course Leader, New School University, New York, Press Fellow, Cambridge University and visiting fellow Duke University. He is the author of a couple of #1 bestsellers. His most recent book in South Africa is in BRICS. EM, I present to you our last speaker, Professor William Gumete, to take us through the topic, understanding the dynamics of coalition governments and their joint priorities in ensuring service delivery in the city of Johannesburg. Prof, over to you, and I'll be scrolling your slide this side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very grateful, and I'm very happy. So, Patsy, I cannot be there with you. I actually look forward, these days after COVID-19 is just so, it's just so good just to be in the presence of people. Unfortunately, I have a bit of a cough, so I'm operating from home. I have some water here to drink if my voice goes away. But if you can't hear me properly, I think IT people just out, and I'll try my best. I'll start off very quickly because unfortunately I have to stick to my own time because I have something else. Maybe just to start off, there's a lot of fears about coalitions at the municipal level. I think the fears are misplaced. People wonder whether municipal coalitions can bring stability. Some people say, if you look at the records since 2016, in South Africa since the 2016 local government elections, coalitions have brought, according to many people, instability, paralysis, service delivery failures. That's the one argument. My argument would be that coalition governments, most probably in South Africa, the world's most diverse society, is more fit for purpose for us than dominant party governments. That's my argument. And I think, the fact, if we analyze all of the coalitions in 2016, and if we analyze the coalitions in the immediate post-1994 period, you will see that actually coalitions have actually fared much better than publicly realized. Now, in a diverse society like South Africa or any other country, developing country or industrial country, if there is a dominant party, whether at a national level or local or provincial level, such a party must be extraordinarily inclusive of all political, ethnic, and language and local differences to become effective. So if a dominant party is not very inclusive, it becomes very difficult for their party to come in. And that is why in a diverse society, it makes much more practical sense to have coalitions. Because it's, in a coalition, it's so much better to get a diversity, to represent diversity. As I say, and whereas in dominant parties, it's really been a struggle for dominant parties to become, to govern in the widest interest of all diverse groups, not only their own constituencies. Because that really is the key. To deliver services effectively, a government must govern in the widest interest and not only in the interest of one constituency. If we can move the slide, please. Now, last year's November, the local elections brought the end, I think, of the end of the liberation era in South Africa. So what do I mean by the liberation era? It will mean that the ANC, the governing party, will from now on not be able to dominate solely based on its past liberation struggle credentials. So from now onwards, clearly what we saw from the November 1 local elections is that people are now, and supporters, members of the ANC, and non-members or non-supporters, will be much more voting for the ANC or any other party based on present performance. So we've just, as a country, I think we've crossed the bridge where liberation struggle credentials of the past is very unlikely going to be the dominant criteria of voting, and where present performance will dominate people's present decision making. So I think we will see the rise in municipal and provincial-based parties. So we'll still have the national-based parties, of course, but we will also see the increasing rise of parties that really are only organized at a municipal level or the provincial-based level. I mean, we've seen it already, of course, in last year's local government election. We've seen the rise of new municipal-based parties or provincial-based parties. So parties actually that have no interest or inclination to be national parties. They're very happy to be at a municipal level, very happy to be at a provincial level. I even think that some of our old national parties has been national parties, like let's just say the EM and so on, who's been in the business for a very long time, but who's been unable to get national votes. We can include the IFP, for example, also. It most probably will make better sense in the present and in the future for those parties also to turn themselves essentially into provincial parties, you know, where their base is, and then have coalitions with other parties in other parts of the country or nationally. End of this liberation era, the dominance of one party, I don't think we will ever get back to a period where one political party will dominate South African politics. We will see a rise, I think, in coalitions, but also municipal and provincial-based parties. And also, I think our next national election is going to be a coalition-based national government. Now, let me please change the slide, move the slide. Now, let me analyze what happened in the post-2016. Why do people say, or why do people perceive coalitions to have failed in the post-2016 era? Now, because there's been such high-profile coalition failures after the 2016 local government elections, I mean, Zwane, the Johannesburg Metro, Nelson Mandela Bay, because, you know, these really big metros have been in the public eye, because they have failed, people assumed that all other coalitions around the country have failed. So, you know, as I said at the beginning, that really is a misplaced view to have, because the failures of the really high-profile bigger metros obscure the fact that in the main, most of the post-2016 coalitions actually were not only stable, they actually delivered better services and cleaner governments. So those coalitions in the smaller towns across the country, whether it's in the Western Cape, whether it's in sort of KwaZulu-Natal, within the Midlands and so on, actually delivered really, really good governments. I mean, I did a survey which came out as a textbook now at the School of Governance, looking at municipal entities. You know, it's about 60, 70 municipal entities across the country. And interestingly, the municipal entities that have performed their best between 2016 and 2019, 2020 were actually performed very well under coalition governments. So that's really interesting. So not only have some of the, the majority of our coalition governments actually done better, even the entities under those coalition governments have actually done really, really well during the period between 2016 and 2019, 2020. I mean, even if you think about, I mean, we know Ukuruleni has been quite effective in a post-2016 their coalition. And of course, as I said earlier, coalitions in KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape. Please move the slide. This is a diagram that I put together just to show in terms of, what makes a successful coalition, the agreements. And that is now looking at 2016 to 2019, analyzing the coalitions. The very first part of it is that for a coalition to be successful, or a coalition agreement to be successful, there has to be a coalition policy pact. So the coalition parties must get together and actually work out a pact, a formal, legal, binding agreement. Now that's very important, where it can state what they will focus on, their priorities. Now, of course, governing is about priorities. there are, whether it's a national government, municipal or provincial, there are a lot of priorities. But of course, there's only, governments can only choose a couple of priorities. Then there has to be a sense of what will be the core policy deliveries. So once the coalition policy pact has been put together, then it would be what would be, the core deliveries that, all the parties can agree on. Then what there has to be a conflict resolution mechanism even before they start governing. So if there's a dispute, coalitions are there's going to be disputes. There has to be a mechanism agreed on already before actually, the coalition starts. And then the next one is that often that coalition agreement, the parties to the coalition agreement must go back to their constituencies and tell them what was agreed upon, make it public, and so on, so that the public and their own constituencies can also hold them accountable. So that really is in a nutshell. Please move on to the next slide. Now, I just wanted to tell you, the next slide is, South Africa actually has a history of actually well-functioning coalitions. So we've got a long history of high-performing coalition governments at national and local level. I mean, in the 1920s and the 1930s, really effective coalitions. More recent times in the Western Cape, immediately after 1994, Western at provincial level, city level. Also, of course, I didn't put it there, but in KwaZulu-Natal, immediately after 1994, that was actually a good coalition, ANC, IFP, very, very good coalition. Then, of course, our big coalition post-1994, President Nelson Mandela's National Unity Government was essentially a coalition that lasted between 1994 and, of course, the National Party left it in 1996. Now, outside South Africa, I mean, there are about 54, 55 African countries, depending how you count. But since independence, since the Second World War, the most successful post-colonial government in the history of African post-independence has been a 3-decade-long post-colonial coalition. So the highest and most consistent growth spurt of any African country among all of the 54, 55 African countries has been a coalition. So you have to imagine that the most successful government in the history, in a modern history in Africa, has been a 3-decade, 4-decade coalition government. Whereas, the dominant governments in Africa has failed, has led to coups, has led to violence, breakdowns of governments, and so on. And even the second best government in Africa since the Second World War has been Botswana. Although Botswana has been run continuously by a dominant government, that dominant government always had what I would call sort of a minor government of national unity. They've always included the opposition party. So even the second best, longest growth spurt, peace spurt in Africa has also been a coalition. I mean, that is the good news story about coalitions in Africa. Just to move the slide, please. Of course, internationally, there's been some really extraordinary coalitions internationally. And I'm going to highlight really the fact that, successful coalitions do not need to have partners that align ideologically. Ideology is not important in successful coalitions. Of course, the obvious one in the South African case is, Mandela's government of national unity, and that was ideologically diverse coalition, but it worked. And then, of course, certainly, I mean, in the recent times, the most successful global coalition is the post-2008 global financial crisis coalition of Angela Merkel. Now, Angela Merkel's coalition in Germany consisted of two diametrically ideologically opposed parties, the Conservative Christian Democratic Union and the Christian Social Union of Bavaria, and then the left-wing Social Democratic Party. Certainly for me, I mean, the last 2 decades in the world, the most successful government, certainly coalition and interestingly, as I say, their coalition was a coalition, a diverse ideological coalition. So, I mean, coalitions can work even if it's ideologically diverse coalitions. Please go on to the next slide. Now, what are the lessons? I think for you, that's most probably the most important thing. What are the lessons from the post-2016 coalition failures? Now, the first thing is many of those failed 26 municipal coalitions were based on parties coming together to keep out another party. Now, one can't build a sustainable coalition based on keeping out another party. That's not sustainable. One has to build a coalition on something, on a pragmatic program for the present, a program for government to govern, not a program to keep another party out. So that really is a really big failure of the coalition government. Secondly, some coalitions are put together by parties who really want to be in power at all costs. Because sometimes it's actually better for a political party to go into the opposition rather than to go into a coalition. It is so much better sometimes. But certainly a coalition that's put together because a party wants to be in power at all costs to assess positions, tenders and patronage, that is very likely going to be a failed coalition. The third reason why many coalitions have failed since 2016 is that coalitions often are put together not on, as I say, on having a policy platform or a coalition or a policy platform, but really on parceling out patronage, government positions, and so on. So what held some of these failed coalitions together was the fact that the gel, the glue that held these coalitions together were giving out patronage. That made coalition partners happy. Now again, that kind of way of putting coalitions together have led to failure. Going forward, what is going to make a coalition successful really is going to be for coalition partners to prioritize really clear coalition policy packs, clear policy issues to collaborate on, clear deliverables, the targets, what is going to be delivered, the targets of it, and so on, and agreeing on these things no matter the ideological differences. Please move it on to the next one, to the next slide. Then also, it's going to be very important that coalition agreements sign legally binding contracts. So it has to be legally binding contracts. And if any of the parties break those legally binding contracts, the coalition must be able to go on. So sit together, agree on a legally binding contract, and part of that contract must say, if a party just for willy-nilly sake just break the pact just because of immaturity, not grown up enough, the coalition must be able to govern and go on. And then, of course, the really, really important is to agree on how will conflict be resolved. Maybe get an outside party, a mediator already before the coalition starts to govern. Now, I mean, to end off, for me, some suggestions maybe to think of that's not there. And please just move it to the final slide. I think as South Africa, we need to consider introducing laws that will support coalitions. Now, the weaknesses so far at a municipality level and even at a national level, there are no laws at municipal level really. I mean, the current laws doesn't make provision for to support coalitions. So that's going to be very important. Even if at a national level, perhaps now that we've been debating in the country party laws, perhaps it's important that we bring in also, even at a national level, some kind of legal guidance on how coalitions should work. The second thing is it would be very important learning from 2016 and also learning now from last year's local government elections that more time needed to be given to governments to put together, or rather for coalition to put together, possibly, I think, at least 30 days. If you look abroad, I mean, in Germany, for example, you know, they normally agree to work almost up to 6 months to put a coalition together. So we need more time in South Africa to put coalitions together, because one can't put a coalition together, certainly not in 7.
Prof? 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 EM, it seems we're having some glitches. I'm not sure what IT is saying, but well. Sorry? Okay. I think, EM, with your permission, we can wrap up this. Unfortunately, we're going to share the presentation with all the attendees. Is he rejoining?
There you go. Apologies, colleagues. Apparently, you know, I went on and on and on, but I've actually left the meeting. Okay,
welcome back, Prof. I will have to fly to slides again. Can you please come and help?
Tell me on which slide did I follow?
You were on slide 10, Prof.
Slide 10. Okay, so okay, I'll quickly run through the slides very, very quickly. Apologies for that. Just on that, just to say that lessons learned, what we're going forward, we need to introduce new laws to support coalitions, as it's going to be the new governing system of the future. We need more time for governments to put together coalitions, possibly at least 30 days. We need new rules which make provision for minority governments to continue when a partner withdraws by breaking a coalition agreement. At a local level, we must change the rule that provincial local MECs should arbitrate in municipal coalition logjams, because we've seen in Zwane, for example, if you have there's potential bias if an MSc is the same from the same party, for example, as let's say the opposition party or even a governing party at a local level in a coalition. So we may have to look for more neutral arbitrators in a conflict between coalition partners. We may need to think about in creating a different independent office to mediate local government coalition breakdowns. Thank you very much, colleagues. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much. We'll take questions. Okay. Prof?
I'm with you.
Yes. This one.
Any questions? there was a question on Israeli coalitions.
Yes,
I haven't done an in-depth look at the Israeli coalitions, but again, also, they have had long-term coalitions for a very long time at a local level. Although most of their coalitions were at a national level, were coalitions that were reasonably ideologically close to each other. So liberal socialists, or conservative, different levels of conservative political parties. But I made a point of Germany because I just wanted to make the point that coalitions could actually also work across the ideological divide. Because before the German national coalition under Merkel, the focus had been in the past only on, the argument was made in the past that maybe coalitions could only work essentially if parties are ideologically closer to each other. But that's not the case.
Thank you, Prof. I've got another question from the floor. Please put your mic on, then you can introduce yourself and then you ask the question.
Good afternoon. I'm Pons Peterson. Thank you very much for the invaluable information shared, Prof. It was an amazing session that puts a new perspective of our coalition. We're just always scared about when you hear about coalition and you think things are not going to go right, but you've put it into perspective and all the fears are gone, and I'm thinking it's really the best way to move forward. What comes to mind is I'm just wondering what type of rules and regulations and systems are you actually referring to when you say that when there's a coalition government we need to have certain I actually didn't make a note of it. Certain rules in place. What examples are there? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I've been thinking in terms of actually, could we have a law or change maybe some of the municipal laws to introduce the idea of a coalition government. So to prevent a coalition government, because our big fears about coalition governments is they collapse because some parties, deliberately collapse them and so on, or over disagreements. So could we have laws which stipulate clearly that, for example, if, there's sometimes valid reasons for one coalition partner to leave, other times it is really just immaturity and so on. So can we have laws in the case of where a party just deliberately collapses a coalition for no other legal reason, but really just on a personal whim of the leader or and so on, to regulate that will be very important. And even in terms of regulating, in terms of in a coalition, the problem with some of our coalitions, of course, also has been that the dominant party in the coalition often want to take control of everything. So can we have some kind of guarantees that a coalition, even if the party is dominant, the party must still share things with the other partners in an equitable way? And then the last one for me really is in terms of maybe giving more time in legal terms to put a coalition together. Because the reality is, as I say, one can't put a coalition together in a week. Sometimes, we may need more time for coalitions. And then lastly, in terms of really a mechanism for what if a coalition just fails for good reasons, to have some kind of conflict mechanism to deal with that.
Prof, we have a question or comment from the Executive Mayor.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think we need more time, perhaps even with the Cabinet, to look at this topic in more depth. I'm interested to ask questions, but I don't know if this is the right platform or the right time. But one of the questions that I think I need to know is, what is your methodology? Because I was part of the 2016 Johannesburg coalition that failed, and I'm not aware of any data collection exercise that happened post that failure. So, but I am aware of a lot of narrative in the public domain that's not necessarily correct, that's very one-sided. I know there's a lot that's never been said. And I'm just curious to know, are you relying on that to make your assertions, or are you actually doing primary data collection? And how representative would your sample be? You know, because even within any government, there would be factions and there would be biases that influence how people would then respond. I think for me, that's the first one, but I think this is a very important area of study. We definitely need to invest in it. And I'd be interested for you to partner with us, really, even as we're navigating what we're doing now. I don't think there's ever been a 9-party coalition in South Africa. I know Helen Zille led a 7-party coalition in Cape Town, but how that also turned out was quite interesting because it grew into a 2/3 majority for her party. And your argument is that we need to be moving deeper into coalition space, you know, and what would be the determining factor to maintain coalitions as opposed to growing one political party as what we saw happening in Cape Town. I think there's a lot to talk about. I mean, I've got questions to ask about associated risk factors. You made examples in the post-2016 coalitions around how Tshwane, Nelson Mandela Bay and Joburg failed, but others succeeded. And I've got insights, right? But I'd like to hear from you what your thinking is. I definitely think we should make time to engage more and perhaps even walk this journey together from a scholastic point of view and look at learnings and how we can also proactively and prospectively apply some of your learnings as we navigate this uncharted terrain. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you very much for the questions. I must say, unfortunately, I have to leave, you know, at a half hour, so I got about 3 minutes, but I'm going to respond to you. I mean, what we did is we had interviews with different political parties, and of course, you know, and always with these sort of things, it's not, fail safe, and there's different factions and parties, so, you know, people may give you different views or different politically colored views, but I think that's sort of, I think from our research, is sort of the best that we could get out of it. So it's based on, you know, say interviews. And again, as I say, it's obviously not 100. Politics is never 100% truth, but it's as close as one could guess. I mean, I would be very happy, and the School of Governance also, of course, to partner and to look at and also to do comparative, to look at other places, also to learn lessons from elsewhere, and to see how, you know, what is applicable, and to look at some of the, you know, to make a little bit much more case studies of those coalitions that actually work, and then, you know, to transfer that knowledge. Just in terms of the, you know, your key question in terms of should parties just stop building parties? No, I think, you know, being a political party really is one wants to govern and wants to govern nationally. That is essentially if you know, if one is a big party. So that shouldn't go away. But I think really it's what is just more important, if a party doesn't get you know enough of a majority, that a coalition then becomes you know, that's a fallback, and the parties must actually be prepared for coalitions and so on. So that doesn't preclude having national parties. So what I'm just saying, what we've seen the trend now is we are going to see more municipal-based parties, and we are going to see more provincial based parties. So a municipal-based party, for example, will be in a coalition at a municipal level with a national party that has a base also as a municipality. That is essentially, again, I mean, that may not be entirely true, but there is sort of the trend analysis that we see right now and in the near future. But maybe, I mean, I'm very open to actually to have a similar kind of conversation, maybe in other forums of the city, maybe with, you know, with the politicians and maybe with the coalitions, actually, partners, and have a conversation of lessons learned. So the information that I have doesn't just stay in academia with my students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. I'm not sure if you still have time to take the last two questions.
Unfortunately, I don't have any more, so I'll have to, at this point, of course. Can I just say thank you? I'm very grateful that you invited me. God bless everyone, and have a good year, and I wish you very well with coalitions and with governing, and also in the municipal entities that you govern. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much. Thanks. EM? We have come to the end of the presentation by Professor Gumede. I think our program ends here. But before I head over to MMC Sudabi to give us a vote of thanks, I've got a few things to say. The first one is just to remind the board members that the legislation, which is Section 93H of the Systems Act, provides that the board of directors of a municipal entity must, and I want to underline that, must provide effective, transparent, accountable, and coherent corporate governance and conduct effective oversight, and I'm also underlining that, of the affairs of the municipal entity. There is a new phenomenon that's called interference, and we must not confuse it with accountability. I like to emphasize that. Please provide effective oversight over the affairs of the entity. Ask for accountability, and that does not constitute interference at all. And when you fail to do that, we must refer to the Masuku case. One might say, in this context, it might relate to the EM or the MMCs, but it also applies to all of you as board members. Please provide effective oversight of the affairs of the entities. And I want to also remind the chairpersons of the boards, EM, communication between the entity and the shareholder at a board level. And mine is legislatively backed. It's not my personal preferences. So Section 93D of the Systems Act provides that the official lines of communication between a municipal entity and the parent municipality exist between the chairperson of the board of directors of the entity and the executive mayor, as the case may be, of a parent municipality. So I want to impress upon the chairperson that there should be a direct line between them and the EM. And we have said we're going to have the chairpersons forum. We'll ensure that the EM is given a forum to engage with the chairpersons for accountability purposes. And that is also backed by a subsection of the same provision or section that says the executive mayor of the entity of the parent municipality may at any time call and convene any meeting of shareholders or other general meeting comprising the board of directors of entities concerned and the representatives of the parent municipality. In this case, it will be your governance. It's legislated and it's provided. In order for the board of directors to give account for actions taken by it. It is not interference, EM, when you convene Ambassador Gibson in your office. We will have to assist you, that is backed by the legislation that I'm reading to you right now. And there's an issue of, as well, that the shareholder should not interfere. It is also backed up by a provision, 93A of the same act, that the shareholder of a municipality, a municipal entity must exercise any shareholder statutory, contractual, and other rights and powers it may have in respect of the municipal entity to ensure that the municipal entity is managed responsibly and transparently and meets its statutory, contractual, and other obligations that contained in the local legislation, local government legislation, the Companies Act, in our internal instruments, your shareholder compact, your SDAs, your shareholder policy, SLAs, and other mechanisms that we have. So I thought I should read this thing out so that we understand, and I've emphasized when we started, again, I've quoted Section 86 in terms of who's the shareholder. And I want to emphasize, please, you are ring-fenced entities, you have an active shareholder, we are not going to get any interference, and we are going to guard any interference from anyone, unfortunately. We've got to be independent, whether it's the MMC, whether it's anyone. Some of us are just free to talk and say things as they are, and we're not scared for that. EM, thank you very much for this opportunity. MMC, Sudapi, thank you. I think we have come to an end, and I would like to say, if there are any areas of improvement, please do approach us so that we can improve and we can have a better induction next time. May I now invite MMC Sudapi to give us a vote of thanks. Thank you very much for your cooperation.
Thank you, Advocate Mlando Kona, for a very well organized event today. And I want to thank all the contributors to this induction today and to the organizers of the whole event. I think today went very smoothly. Thank you. The Mayor's speech was, in a word, inspirational. And the presentations from the city departments continue to remind me that the intellectual capital inherent in our city is formidable. And thank you very much to the esteemed presenters who have shared their valuable insight and given of their wealth and experience and knowledge. Professor Themba Maseko, Mr. Delani Mtembu, and Professor William Gumede. Professor Maseko's presentation on good governance tells us that we need to fix the city in order to gain the trust of voters. And each one of you has been appointed on the basis of your qualification so that you are more than equipped to provide the guidance required to produce a professional entity that provides the service for which it exists. And in the words of Mr. Delani Mtembu, our leadership must be purposeful, transformative, and transitional so that our entities begin to change the lives of all our residents for the better. We must move fast, have a transversal and integrated view of the city, and the time will come when you will need courage to act decisively and ethically. We have a new future to birth, one of hope in this our city of golden opportunities. The temptation for each entity to consider itself an ivory tower in a silo can be very compelling. We must constantly remind ourselves that every entity and every department has influence in and is influenced by every other entity and department. We are one single city of gold, the city of Johannesburg. If city power cannot keep the lights on, Joshko cannot build social housing. If Joburg Water cannot repair pipes, developers cannot develop accommodation for our residents. If there's not a single fire engine in every single fire station, the safety of everyone is compromised, including you and I, because we live in Johannesburg too. Every entity has its own IT department. The city as a whole has in the region of 400 systems, all collecting data, and none of that data is integrated. And what is described in the anecdotal lived experience that is absolutely not irrelevant as a billing crisis is the symptom. The cause is the fractured systems that creates incongruent data. Some of you operate on one version of SAP, another operates on another version of SAP. Someone has Sage, someone has Oracle, and I think there's even one that still runs on JD Edwards. And then there are all the apps all over the place doing this and that, and even in a single entity, all that data is not integrated. Every entity controls its own supply chain to a point. Contracts are awarded at all levels that are clearly inappropriate, do not supply value for money, and are in favor, in some cases, of government employees. Those contracts move to the group supply chain once it has been awarded, and that system then is manual. We have a spreadsheet that controls in excess of 2,000 contracts. And this is how it is possible that contracts expire into a vacuum and the city is exposed while the supply chain must be re-engaged to fill the gap. And it is in this chaos that corruption, maladministration, and theft thrives. And so while your individual mandate is entity prosperity, this is not in isolation. It is in the context of being one with the city. It must include that your individual mandate includes City of Johannesburg prosperity. Your money is not your own. The MFMA states that all the revenue in the municipality must reside in the main municipal bank account. And every day, the city sweeps the entity's bank accounts and retrieves all the positive balances, which is great. And thank you very much to all the entities that have a positive balance at the end of the day. But that same exercise must fill the entity bank accounts if there is a negative balance. And at the beginning of every day, every entity starts with a zero bank account. The current status is that collectively, some entities owe the city 6.1 billion rand. Now, please take a moment to imagine the services that could have been delivered to the residents of Johannesburg with 6.1 billion rand. That's close to 10% of our current draft operational budget. City Power only needs 554 million rand extra in the current capex to be able to deliver all that it needs to upgrade the systems in the city to provide sustainable electricity, absent, of course, Eskom's load shedding. Just imagine how much further along we could be if every entity had a positive contribution to the collective coffer. Because that 6.1 billion rand that is missing affects the operational budget for this year, which affects every entity. If, as Professor William Gumede has explained, that coalition government is here to stay, Johannesburg is uniquely placed to be a beacon of hope, to prove once again that cooperative and collaborative government is indeed possible and can succeed. So let's take up the baton and create a new way of doing order to return the golden shine to our city of gold, so that this city can show our country that change is possible and sustainable, that we can show the world that we share in the responsibility of stewarding the planet's resources, and that we can show our whole continent that her dignity can be restored. I thank you very much.